Hey, how's it going, guys? Domino21 here, back with another deck profile for you all. So what I have here is my Varga deck updated for set 4 with the inclusion of Twin Pulsive Dragon. So the deck overall, you pretty much are playing it the same way as always, at least until it gets its makeover this coming set 5. But with the addition of Twin Pulsive, it does add a few extra play options for the deck that I felt that was missing overall. So it adds some nice, good, positive elements to the deck overall, and I'm really liking how it's been testing so far. So without further ado, let's actually go ahead and get to it. So for the ride line itself, the starter, I mean, you could just run whatever, but you know, for all the OGs out there, you know, we gotta represent Kagero any way we can with the undo here. And for the remainder of the ride line, we have the Blaze Ember Dragon, Boulder Axe, and Varga himself. So Boulder Axe and Varga are pretty self-explanatory, they're pretty much staples. The grade 1 for Blaze Ember Dragon. So for the longest time, I actually was running Rising Star, which you can get in the newly released trial deck. And I think this is a fantastic option as well. I may even consider going back to this. But the reason why I switched over to Blaze Ember Dragon is because for, well, two reasons. Well, for the reasons why I wasn't running him before is because, well, going second, it's not very great because he can't really attack a grade 2 unboosted. And I ran a lot more grade 1s in my deck, which then created a dead spot that he occupies on my field that I usually end up wanting to replace him to play another grade 1 that I think provides more value overall. So I felt like he was kind of like a dead card for me. And not to mention that before Twin Pulsive, I didn't really have a lot of ideal targets going into the late stages of the game, where the 10k body overall provided much value at all. So I really just like the Rising Star, just saves me a card from discarding early game, you know, from the ride deck as well. So I really like the overall value it gives. But I think this time around, because of how the format is right now, just having that kind of like that guaranteed option to be a little bit extra aggressive with your opponent early game, which is very important for Varga, I think is key. But most importantly, like I mentioned, with the addition of Twin Pulsive Dragon, now you have more targets to really make the most value out of the 10k body that you're going to have on the field, you know, with the 23k or 33k number, nice magic number going forward. And with the addition of another grade 3 I play in this deck. But overall, I really like this a lot so far. I still may contemplate going back to Rising Star. I know especially I may end up going back to him you know, in later sets. But for now, I think this is serving its purpose for what I want it to be for this deck. So that's for the ride deck itself. Now the grade 3s, of course, we have the main man himself, Varga, not much to say. Persona riding is way too important for this deck. I've definitely, in my experience so far, games where I'm just not able to Persona ride enough, I just really felt the game was just slowly becoming out of reach for me immediately, especially when matched up with a lot of other decks that can really work just as fast as Varga can, as far as aggression is concerned with how this meta is shaping up. Which is why instinctively, out of like, honestly, I will say recency bias, I am running the Cup as my Regardless piece. Logically speaking, there are a lot of benefits for Caliburn, which is what I ran before, because, you know, drawing the Pottery, draw 2 cards is always valuable just to draw into your pieces, but also the countercharge, I think, is actually what I think is more the underrated part of this card in Varga, because Varga really has no way to countercharge at all effectively. So usually when I ran Caliburn, I would save this card if I can going into the late game, so then I can just use it to get that key countercharge, which could be very important to make some key plays for some extra push late game. So logically speaking, everything points to Caliburn as being the ideal choice. But like I said, this is more for recency bias because I've actually had a string of games in my locals tourneys where I just wasn't Persona riding enough, so I just kind of threw this in out of sheer rage, like just wanting to make sure I can try to assure my Persona ride as consistently as possible per game. So either or, whether you have Caliburn or Cup, if you don't have one or the other, just go with what you have. They're both really good options. And then for Twin Pulsive, I do run 3 So I think four. I think three is a good number. I think four may be a little bit too much because there are some conflictions when it comes to energy in this deck. Because there's a lot of energy options overall, so you definitely have to pick and choose how you use your energy throughout the game. But also, I think what I really am loving a lot is his second skill. So if you guys know what he does, his first skill, when he's placed on Vanguard Circle, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Varga as card name, you Energy Blast 3, check the top 5 cards of your deck, and then call a grade 2 or lower card. So he does give this deck its only way to search from the deck, and also at the same time thin out, like that one card from your deck for a little bit better compression. So that's something that this deck was missing, that sometimes it could frustrate me just how this deck really had no way to search or thin out the deck efficiently, because it really, for the most part, just draws off the top of the deck. So you kind of are playing off the top deck with this deck, but at least with the addition of Twin Pulsive, it does give me some better play options overall. So a lot of value with this card. But I think personally, where I think the value really comes out is the second skill. When he's retired by your Varga's ability, you can give him your Varga Vanguard +5 until end of turn. I think that's key because on paper the +5 doesn't seem like a lot, but being able to go from 23 to 28 hits some key thresholds and a nice magic number. Because as you guys know, if you play Varga itself, you kind of like know this pain. Whenever I attack with Varga, in the cases where I don't hit any triggers and my opponent hits that one damage trigger check, it'll be 23k versus their 23k, so it's usually an easy 5k guard on the second swing, especially if I don't have a booster for him. So that could be a little bit frustrating at times. So having him 28k then makes it a 10k guard, which you wouldn't think is much, but with how the Divine format is so far, in my opinion, I think 10k guard is probably the most awkward guard amount to guard for, and oftentimes I find my opponents dropping 15k shields anyway, so you can get a lot of extended value in the long run for it. Plus also, as I said earlier, the fact is that you rely so much on persona riding just to have strong enough turns throughout the game to keep up with your opponent damage wise. The 5k can definitely make up for those turns where you don't persona ride, or better yet, I had games where I only had maybe one persona ride available in my hand, and maybe I'm not ready to make a big push for my divine skill that turn. My opponent's probably at low damage, I'm not expecting to crit them, and maybe they still have sufficient hand to kind of deal with the divine skill. So I'll probably just hold off, use a Twin Pulsive for value, and then that plus 5k can kind of be like a pseudo persona ride as well. 28k I find to be just a good enough number to kind of make things a little bit awkward for my opponent to guard, and as long as you can do that, I think you'll be fine in the long run. So Twin Pulsive overall, I think there's still some flaws with him. I don't like how the +5 is when your opponent's on grade 3, so it does kind of hinder him a little bit going first, but then again, going first is always advantageous anyway, so I can understand that. And there are occasions where I did miss on his first skill, so that was a little frustrating at times, but overall, he still brings, he does bring more pros than cons to the deck overall, so I welcome him. And last but not least, we have 2 Glaive Dragons. I still like Glaive a lot in this deck. I think 2 is a perfect number. I think 3 is a little bit too much because deck space is a little bit tight with the ratios, but as I explained with Blaze Ember Dragon, where are ya? As I mentioned with how much I like the 10k body on the board to boost Twin Pulsive, it's even stronger with the Glaive Dragon hitting for 33 or 43 with Persona. So basically on my board, when I have Varga as my Vanguard, I usually have like my right side with my Blaze Ember Dragon sitting here, and this column overall is dedicated to my grade 3s, my 2 grade 3s in the deck for the most part. So really fantastic. Also, he can be kind of be like a pseudo shield, because I always find my opponents attacking him for whatever reason, because they're scared of this card, so he can provide some pseudo value there as well. Now moving on to grade 2s, probably like my favorite card in the deck, honestly, Dragler Shura. So Shura provides a lot of value in the deck. Now when I got started coming back into this game for this format and picked up Varga as my first deck, one thing I kind of reflected back then was I definitely overused Shura a little bit too much, to where I end up overusing a lot of my resources early, which left me with far less to work with late game where you probably need it the most. So my advice with Shura is definitely be careful with how you use her. Just use her, don't abuse her, and she will definitely, give back to you. But early game, I really love her first attack. When she attacks, Energy Blast 2, give herself +5, and then you can target a card in your field, and then when it's retired during your turn, you can bounce it back to hand. So it's really good to recycle some key grade 1s in this deck that have a lot of value. So there's a ton of value that she brings to this deck early on. And if you have everything going well for you, you're using the benefits of your grade 1s, and you're recycling them constantly with Shura, I end up like having turns ending with like 10 to 12 cards in my hand. I'm usually sitting comfortable from there. And then with her secondary skill, you can counterblast and call her back onto the field when she's retired by Varga, and she gets +10. So she obviously, can help make that late game push. Again, be very careful with how you use this. Counterblast is so tight in this deck. As I said, there's no way to countercharge. So once you use your counterblast, it's gone pretty much forever unless you get lucky to heal. So I usually like to use that secondary skill either if I'm trying to make that extra push for divine skill to try and get my opponent to 4 damage or pressure them to get to 4 damage so that I can force divine skill, or of course when I'm making that late game push. I typically only use the second skill on turns I persona ride, but turns I don't persona ride, I kind of just prioritize using the first skill overall because I don't know, I don't think it's really worth it. Plus, if you have the same luck as me, my opponent always damage checks a trigger all the time. At least that's what it feels like. And next, of course, you have your energy cyclers, not much to say here. And 3 boulder axe, not much to say here as well. The last grade 2 I do play Defensing Roar. So although Varga is still inherently a very aggro type of deck, I still like having a nice quality defensive option in the deck. And because, as you will see later, I do run front triggers. A Defensing Roar with the front trigger being a 30k shield is a ton of value, being able to bounce back up to hand and of course, most likely guard something else. Pretty strong attack with 1 card as well, because 20k shields are so valuable. Just like that for the option. And of course, I've had games where I draw my over trigger and I'm able to if I'm able to Defensing Roar just to basically use my over trigger twice defensively, I usually end up winning out in that game because the turns I end up doing that is when my opponent's trying to make like one big final push at me. So I'm able to survive and then keep my other important pieces, to make my push. So really, really like having Defensing Roar as a option there. And then for grade 1s, of course, you have the Perfect Guard with your Sanctitude. I still like Sanctitude over the other one. Can't remember the name of it, but there still exist decks with just straight out triple drive, so I just think this is better overall. And then we have the $1 million card itself, Rokusei. Easily my favorite grade 1 in the deck. I don't think it's worth like $50, $100 or whatever, but it's still a very strong card. So when it's placed, if it's placed, your opponent can intercept if you have Varga as your Vanguard, and then when a card is retired in front of him, in the same column as him, you can retire him and then draw a card. So this is usually who I like to use the most in combination with Shura to get a ton of value, because just being able to keep your opponent from intercepting so that they're pretty much going to stay there and look Varga in the eye as you blow up your front row, as you blow up the front row is crazy value. Because obviously if you're facing Varga, you're going to do everything you can to try and use your front row to intercept, to try and get as much value out of it as possible. So he prevents all of that, and then having him with Shura just allows you to just use it again the following turn. So a lot of value with this combination right here. So definitely I think 4 is a must if you can get your hands on them. Then I am running 3 Impale Horn Dragon. For the longest time I did ran 4, but because I have the option of Shura to recycle it, and also because of Blaze Ember Dragon, that's going to pretty much occupy space on my board, it's really tough to have like that 1 extra in my deck that I would probably like to call in the rearguard circle, because really like pretty much the same setup I try to go for game by game is having Varga as my Vanguard. Of course, we have the Blaze Ember column, well, boosted by the Impale Horn Dragon. And then, where are ya? You have the Blaze Ember Dragon with either Glaive or Twin Pulsive here. And then you have this spot right here, that's reserved for Rokusei and maybe Shura or someone. So this is usually how I have everything organized. So it's really tough to have. So there's not much space to really have an Impale Horn Dragon to kind of use as a booster, unless of course you are facing a matchup that does retire your rear guard, so it's still good to have options. But ideally you usually just want to use Impale Horn Dragon, prioritize as your Vanguard booster, because he's obviously a 15k booster when you boost your Varga Vanguard, and then he can Soul Blast 1, retire himself, and draw. So I think 3 is perfect this time around. You may want to consider 4 if you do choose to run Rising Star as your starter, because that's just one space right here that's open for you to use. But either or, it's all preference. And then for the last of my grade 2s, I do run 2 mid-hat. There are definitely different options I ran, but I think overall I just like the mid-hat. It's just another target for a Twin Pulsive that can just, you know, call out for free and then net me a draw out of it. So what I like to, if I can draw these early, I like to just kind of drop them down to be for some early aggression, and I don't really care if my opponent attacks these at all. In fact, they are doing me a favor if they do that. So this slot right here could be a lot of different options. You could run 2 of Colgate, Flan, whatever his name is. If you want to run more energy cyclers, you could run Cat here, which I do have as an option as well, if you want to just you know, have more options. So that's something I also still keep in consideration, but I thought to keep it simple and just add mid-hat here. Just a very simple basic card, very easy to use throughout the game, all stages of the game. So just really like his value overall. And then grade 0s or triggers, pretty straightforward. We run 8 vanilla crits. I don't like the effect one. I've actually lost games before because the 5k can make a huge difference. Because really 4k boost in this deck doesn't really do anything at all. It's basically nothing as far as boost value. So the 5k vanilla I'm sticking with. And then I'm running 3 fronts, 4 heals, and then blue OT. I haven't really found any other option that I like more than the blue OT. I think blue OT is just kind of like the standard for decks that don't want to run their nation OT and still want to run 9 crits in your deck, basically. So the front trigger, so there's really an ongoing debate, I guess you can say, between front triggers and the draw triggers, which I do have as well. So the draw triggers, I think, are still good options. I've been testing them myself, but I don't know, I just like the overall shield value that fronts give, and my theory has always been if you are running a deck that does a lot of dead drawing turn by turn, which does increase your chances of dead drawing a trigger, I'd rather just go with the front triggers, because I'd rather draw into a front trigger than a draw trigger. And although draw triggers are the second best card trigger to check in your damage zone next to heals, I think overall, like, that extra card you do draw from him just diminishes in value when you do have to guard like those key attacks that everyone's hitting, like 28k for example. So being able to guard a 28k attack, which is very common in today's meta with one card, is still very valuable. And this is of course like probably my #1 target with Defensing Roar. Like, it's a lot of value that you're getting with that. So pretty straightforward lineup. So that is the deck overall. Just like the overall simplicity that this deck brings, and I think if you're like a new player to Vanguard or a player coming back like I am, this is a good like helmet deck, I like to say, where you can just go in and just make very simple plays, set up everything, and just go to town. But looking forward to the makeover that Varga is going to get, and in the meantime, just going to enjoy this while we wait. So thank you guys for watching. Comment down below with any questions, feedback, and I'll see you guys next time.